Ah, Valheim. It's a magical game. Until you die in the wrong biome without a portal. One minute you're a Viking legend sailing into the sunset. The next you're sprinting through a murderous biome, hungry, dodging goblins, and praying you don't get one shot by a ravenous death squirrel. Again. Valheim is one of the best survival games ever made. But it's also very good at punishing you for being unprepared, and it threads the line between being challenging and unfair. So let's talk about why it works and why sometimes it doesn't. Let's start with the world of Valheim. The world feels cozy, dangerous and alive all at the same time. It's characterized by its distinct biomes, each with its own identity, not just visually but mechanically too. From mysterious mistlands, lava-rich ashlands, mellow meadows and many more. The art style is, I think, best described as low poly high res. It's what PlayStation 1 games look like in my nostalgic memories. It's one of those things that grows on you. At first it can look rough, even outdated, but the longer you play and the more you see of the world, the more it clicks. This art style combined with the music of Valheim adds to the atmosphere of the world immensely. The cozy and, at this point I dare say, iconic tunes of the meadows are stuck in my head for days whenever I open up the game. And whether you're exploring, fighting bosses, or just standing at your base watching the weather roll in, the soundtrack adds so much emotional weight to everything that you're doing. And then add to this the weather effects, which are another standout factor in the world atmosphere. The storms, the mist, the rain. These effects not only look good, but you can feel the effect that they have on the world. One of the areas where you can feel these weather effects the most is sailing. I think Valheim did an incredible job with sailing, both with implementing it as a core feature of your gameplay loop, but also the aesthetics of it. I have no other game that even comes close to the same feeling that Valheim gives me out on the water. And I think this is one of those areas where Valheim feels both magical, but also where it can punish you the hardest. The oceans feel fast, dangerous and mysterious. Monsters like sea serpents are genuinely terrifying when you're not ready for them. Hell, even the weather can be terrifying, watching those waves damage your puny boat or sailing into the boiling water of the ashlands for the first time. Even just sailing through thick mist trying to navigate your way without crashing into unexpected objects can be scary. The idea of dying in the middle of the ocean and losing your ship full of precious cargo, that's survival horror. Exploration and the different biomes continue to be one of Valheim's strongest aspects. But these biomes, especially the later ones, introduce some problems as well. Let's take the mistlands for example. Navigation there can be incredibly annoying. You can't see very far because of the mist, which is the whole gimmick of the area, I get it. But this low visibility combined with the uneven terrain just leads to constant stamina management issues. Or take the ashlands, the latest biome, which are very hostile by design, which is fine, but the sheer amount of environmental destruction and enemy drops just makes inventory management a nightmare. At this point you're fighting both the world and your backpack. And this backpack of yours is very important, especially doing something like resource gathering. And I've heard people say that resource gathering is boring by definition and must be accepted as a mandatory chore of survival games. I think games like Valheim prove this wrong. I'd even dare say the execution of resource gathering in Valheim is the best in the whole genre. Trees don't just disappear when you chop them. They fall down, they roll downhill, they domino other trees. They crush enemies, and if you're not careful they'll crush you as well. Ores collapse realistically when their support is destroyed. You can lure a big enemy over a vein and him smash the rock for you. It sounds simple, but it turns gathering from a chore into something you actually pay attention to and might even start enjoying. And with all these resources that you gather up, there's a bunch of stuff you can craft and build. And I think Valheim is one of the few survival games where I genuinely enjoy building, even though the system definitely isn't perfect. Snapping can be finicky, getting all the items from a chest is annoying, there's no real efficient way to get up high, there's a lot of weird mechanics that you have to get used to, but despite all that, every single playthrough I end up building something way more elaborate than planned. I'll always tell myself, this time I'll just build a simple base. And every single time I end up with a fully detailed Viking settlement that I absolutely did not need. And this is where Valheim shines. It's creativity without overwhelming complexity. You want to build because the game encourages it naturally through progression, not because it forces you to. It could, however, do with some quality of life updates, like being able to craft using items directly from chests, having a dedicated armor tab to free up the very limited inventory space. But in the grand scheme of it all, these are minor annoyances. But enough about building, exploring and resource gathering. Let's talk combat. Combat in Valheim is interesting. When you're in control, it feels great. Weighty hits, good visual feedback and satisfying sound design. Blocking, parrying and dodging attacks can also feel very rewarding. Add to this an interesting magic system with very unique weapons, and transitioning from a melee Viking into an elemental shaman just feels incredible. Also magic having its own mana system instead of using stamina makes combat feel very fluid and flexible. Weapon design and choices therein is also another strong point of Valheim. There usually are many options and you are encouraged to use and try different weapons throughout your journey. Most enemies have a combat style that they are weak to, making it very rewarding to craft and carry different weapons. And Valheim has some of my all-time favorite weapons. To just list a few, you've got what I like to call Thor's Spear. It's called Himinafo, but there's a 100% chance I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. But it's so good. The audio visual feedback, the thunder strikes, the booming hits, it makes me feel way more powerful than I am. And then you have magic weapons like the nature staff, which just summons huge tentacles that bonk your enemies into oblivion. A staff that summons a huge burning undead troll? Yes please and thank you. Things like fist weapons in this game just feel so good. They make combat feel personal and every hit bears a grudge. But despite all these amazing weapons, combat also has its weak points. You feel this especially when you never really had the option to gain control over a situation. In that case, combat starts feeling unfair instead of challenging. Examples of this are narrow spaces like infested mines or the dungeons. Fights can start to get very chaotic. Enemies attack from all angles, terrain works against you, and deaths often feel out of your control. When combat kills you because you misplayed, fair enough. But when it kills you because terrain or off-screen enemies or the camera angle just said nope, that is very frustrating. And the real skill in Valheim's combat isn't its combat at all, it's managing your stamina. Speaking of which, let's talk about the stamina system and food. Valheim lives and dies by its stamina and food systems, and I don't mean that metaphorically. These systems define a huge part of your character progression. Food isn't just a simple buff, it defines how you play. Your health pool, stamina bar, and even your mana later on are entirely dictated by what you eat. If you're struggling in combat, 9 times out of 10 it's not because your weapon or gear is bad, it's because your food is. And despite how this might sound, I don't think it's a bad system. It forces you to think tactically about what food you're using for different situations. It also makes discovering new recipes very exciting. It's not just, oh, I get X percentage more HP now. No, you gain immense power with the right food combinations. It also gives you choices to make. If you want to use mana, you have to give up on a considerable amount of stamina and health. Is this worth the trade-off for your playstyle? And exactly how much are you willing to sacrifice for that sweet, sweet mana? Though having these food options is a strong part of the stamina system, you can really feel the weaknesses of this in the early game when you're very limited in your choices for food, especially good stamina food. Running, jumping, fighting, building, everything drains your stamina. Combine that with uneven terrain, misty biomes or steep mountains and you'll find yourself standing still waiting for stamina to regenerate a bit more often than you would like in the early game. That being said, once you understand the system and start optimizing food and gear, the game opens up massively. You stop feeling weak, you stop panic running, and you start controlling fights instead of reacting to them. Despite being very closely bound to the food that you're using, progression in Valheim feels great overall, both visually and mechanically. But not everything lands. I think one thing Valheim does do exceptionally well is its biome progression. The game is very strict about where you should and shouldn't be at any given point. If you wander into a biome too early, the game doesn't warn you, it just deletes you. And honestly, I kinda respect it. It makes each biome feel earned. You don't just stumble your way into the swamp or the plains and survive through skill alone. You survive because you prepared, upgraded your gear and killed the previous boss. That sense of, I shouldn't be here yet is terrifying early on. And incredibly satisfying once you finally come back prepared and exert your revenge on the Death Squidos. Unlocking these biomes rewards you with new items such as gear, weapons, materials, food and tools as well. Finding or crafting these and seeing all the new recipes pop up is a very satisfying feeling of progression. And granted, this design won't work for everyone, but for the players it clicks with, it's incredibly satisfying. To fully utilize a biome, you will have to defeat the boss from the previous one. After defeating a boss, you gain an item that you will need to successfully navigate or utilize the next biome, and also their head. You can hang this head on an altar and gain a boss power. And these boss powers sound exciting, but in practice, very few of them are actually useful. There's one or two that you might actually use, being the one from the first boss and the third boss. But the others are situational at best, underwhelming at worst. Visually it looks impressive to hang their head up on an altar though. And looking at the boss fights themselves, mechanically and musically, they feel epic. The skill, the atmosphere, the presentation, they're all top tier. But there is a huge issue with boss fights, and that is the difference in fighting them alone or as a group. When you're doing these fights alone, some fights are just way too long. There's 5-minute fights, which are great. There's 10-minute fights, which is okay, it's pushing a bit, but we can handle that. And there's 20-minute fights, which is tedious. Then there's 45+ minute fights, which is just unreasonable. Playing alone the Queen fight, which is the penultimate boss, took me 45 minutes, including deaths and running back and teleporting back and stuff. And I was properly geared. And if you think that's bad, the last boss took me a staggering 54 minutes to complete. That is not challenging, that is exhausting. When you're playing together, these fights are much better to handle because you can have different players fill different roles. When you're alone, you have to do it all, well, alone. You have to dodge all the attacks, deal with the ads, all the other bullshit that the boss throws at you whilst trying to still damage the boss. Even if you're just with 2 players, it becomes so much simpler because one player can just DPS while the other dodges and deals with the other mechanics. And I think this is the area where Valheim really falls short the most. Playing the game alone can be brutal, Corpse runs are long, they're dangerous and incredibly demoralizing if you die again on the way back. Without portals nearby, getting your gear back can feel like a full expedition, and failing that expedition can push you straight into a rage quit. But in multiplayer, a lot of these frustrations smooth out. Friends can help clear the path, retrieve bodies, or at least make the suffering funny. Boss fights feel way better paced, deaths feel less final, the resource gathering gets a lot easier, and the game leans more into its co-op survival fantasy. The game is absolutely playable solo. I did my whole playthrough alone, but it's clearly designed with multiplayers in mind. And I think this is also where mods come in. Valheim has an insanely strong modding community that fixes many quality of life issues and expands building options massively. For a lot of long-term players, mods are what keep the game fresh between updates. I touched on it briefly in the previous section, but let's roll back to the death and punishment system in Valheim. I think it's one of its most controversial systems. When you die, you drop all of your items and equipped gear. This is brutal and can be incredibly punishing if you don't know what you're doing, which, especially on your first playthrough, you don't. And it means you can easily get stuck in death loops. Let me explain what these death loops look like. Imagine you die in a dangerous place in Valheim. Best case scenario, you had a portal close which you can use to get back there. If you don't, enjoy the journey back from your base. But wait, your boat is still the island you traveled to and died at, so you gotta make a new boat. Now on your way there, you encounter a sea serpent that slaps you on your puny boat. Back to your base, restart this loop. Now when you do make it back to the island 15 minutes later, you're naked, you probably don't have the best food, so I hope you don't run into anything dangerous whilst making your way back to your gravestone. And once at this gravestone, you still have to click it, which slows you down by the way. Grab all your stuff and hope that you're not over encumbered now, because the belt that you were wearing, which lets you carry an extra 150 kilogram, isn't automatically equipped again. So if you're surrounded by enemies, you've got to quickly drop some stuff, run away, get somewhere relatively safe, which in some biomes like the Ashlands just isn't an option, and then equip your gear, run away, hopefully survive to live another day. Now this might sound like an exaggeration, but it really isn't. In your average playthrough you will experience this several times, and it can make for some serious quit moments. Especially for solo players. Again, this system is really harsh. It walks a fine line between tension and frustration. Sometimes it motivates you to prepare better, and other times it just wastes your time and makes you want to log off. Well, with that rant out of the way, let's take a step back and look at Valheim's strengths and weaknesses. I think Valheim is a phenomenal survival game, but it's definitely not flawless. Let's start with its strengths. The world of Valheim has great atmosphere and very strong immersion. The resource gathering system is best in genre. It's got a meaningful and palpable progression system. Exploration and sailing are very strong. The magic combat and build variety is something that I enjoyed a lot. The building system and its creativity is amazing. And the music that accompanies Valheim is wonderful. But there are of course also weaknesses, which for me can be summarized in two big ones and a smaller list of bullet points with quality of life frustrations. The two big ones being solo versus group balancing, especially in late game content. Everything just takes a lot longer and is a lot more punishing when you're alone. And then the second one is the death loops. Being stuck in one of these death loops can feel very punishing rather than instructive. And for the quality of life frustrations, I'd summarize these to the following points. You can't craft from chests. There's no dedicated armor tab, which reduces your already small inventory size. The building system can be a bit finicky at times. Navigation in the mist biome is annoying, and overly aggressive mobs in Ashlands it can be too much at times. Despite its flaws, Valheim still remains one of the most memorable survival experiences for me out there. It's a game that rewards preparation, patience and experimentation, and it punishes recklessness hard. For me it still reigns supreme as the best survival game I have ever played. Its atmosphere, world design, resource gathering and progression systems are exceptional. But it's also a game that can be brutally frustrating, especially solo. When it works, it's magical. When it doesn't, it can push you to the point of quitting. And yet, I keep coming back. Because despite all its flaws, Valheim does something very few survival games manage. It makes the world feel worth fighting for. I've been Mojo, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.